For this project, I'm going to be making a coif pattern from the Tudor Tailor, a lovely book that I found at the library in my university. It covers fashion from the reigns of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, so roughly like 1500s, 1600s, should that be your interest in history. Right now I'm taking measurements of the patterns in the book so that I can scale them up and transfer them onto paper so that I can then later cut them out and make life-size paper copies of them. Now, the paper I use to make my pattern pieces are just rolls of brown packing paper. You can find them in pretty much any store next to like packing tape and shipping envelopes and all that kind of stuff. But you can use really any sort of paper. When it comes to drafting pattern pieces on paper, or scaling them up from patterns in a book, it can be kind of daunting at first. I know I kind of had a lot of difficulty with that, and I still kind of do because I'm still super new to the whole sewing thing and historical tailoring and all that jazz. But one of the videos that I found super helpful was from Morgan Donner. I'll put a link in the description, but she has a couple videos. One is transferring them onto computer paper, like taking them from online and then transferring them onto paper, and then the other is like what I'm doing here, taking measurements from a book and then transferring them onto a life-size paper pattern piece. Up next, I'm cutting the pattern pieces out. One of the issues that you should look out for if you're using the rolls of the brown paper is that the paper tends to curl up pretty severely, as you can see in the video, when you go to cut out the pieces. I have found ways to mitigate this by just ironing the paper either before you cut out the pieces or after, so it lays nice and flat. You can also use a heavy book or any heavy object and set that on top of the curled pieces, and that'll help it lay flat. Now I am moving on to cutting the coif pieces out in the linen fabric. The top piece I'm going to be cutting on the bias, and the side pieces are just going to be cut on the straight of grain as normal. I'll be cutting out a total of 6 pieces for this coif, 2 of that kind of almond shaped piece that is the top of the coif, and then 4 of the side pieces. I'm going to be cutting out that many pieces just because it's a double layer item. If you were using a thicker material than I am now, this is relatively thin linen that I'm using, but if you are using a thicker fabric, you could easily get away with just a single layer. Now that all my pieces are cut out, it's finally time to start sewing. Now for sewing, I'm going to be using a waxed silk thread. I know unwaxed linen thread was the more common way to sew garments, but unfortunately I didn't have any linen thread on hand, so I figured I may as well just use the waxed silk thread because it's not super far off the mark for what I'm doing anyhow. Now I am moving on to sewing the pieces together. Here I am starting to sew the side pieces of the coif to the top part to make one half of the entire coif. To attach the pieces together, I'm using a mixture of running and back stitches. Excuse my rough stitching, I'm still really new to the whole hand sewing experience, but I tend to use a couple running stitches followed by a back stitch just to kind of hold everything together just a little bit stronger. Here you can see one half of the finished coif. Now the other half is going to look exactly like this, and I'm going to do the same exact process, except at the end they'll just be joined together to make one 2-layer garment. And now I am trying on that one half to make sure everything fits and see if there are any alterations I need to make so I can plan for that in sewing the second half of the coif. Now I have skipped ahead to when I finish the second half of the coif to show how they are joined together. I'll take one of the coif pieces and flip it around so the right side is facing out, and then I join that up with the right side of the other coif, so all I can see are the raw seams all around, and I will go and sew around all the edges, joining them together with a just plain running seam like I did before. To make the ties for the closure of the coif, I just took some scrap pieces of linen and then folded them over twice, once towards the center and then again on that center line to form just a thick lace type piece, which I then whip stitched down the seam to secure it. Now I've finished sewing all the way around the coif, save for an opening in the back to allow me to turn the coif right side out now, which I'm doing now, just getting all the ties out and making everything neat and tidy so I can finish sewing up that back little part. As you can see, the coif is almost done, save for that one little seam at the back. With that back seam sewn up, I'm now ready to put on the coif and make sure it fits. Now, before I took this little video, I tried it on and also ironed all of the seams around the edges to make them lie flat and just look nicer overall. You don't need to do that should you sew your own coif, but I prefer it just because it gives a cleaner overall product.